Pipeline. I'm Cory Morgan, one of the columnists with the Western Standard, and I host the Cory Morgan Show. Derek's indisposed. He's usually in this seat, so I get to fill in for it today, but that's fine. I've always got lots of ranting and raving in me on a number of issues, and this is our weekly panel show. So this week, I'll start from the end in introducing who we got in. Our news editor, Dave Naylor, is at the end of the table there. How's it going, Dave?
Good. Don't lie. He's not indisposed. He's on holiday, sitting by a lake somewhere. The guy gets more holidays than Trudeau.
Yeah, I like saying indisposed because it gives that sound as if I'm covering up with maybe he's in the washer with a gastric issue or something like that.
Anyways, glad to be here.
Good. And in the middle, our opinion editor, Nigel Hannaford.
You have just incented me to show up for every issue because I don't know how my absence would be explained. So I'm here.
Well, that's right. And that's it. We spoke of that when Dave was in on my show earlier. That's your reserved seat in the middle. I mean, we kind of shift around and everything, but that's the Hannaford spot.
The throne, the Hannaford throne.
We don't shift from that. So lots of fun stuff to cover. I'll get some of the other things out of the way, though. The reason we're here, the reason we can do these shows, the reason we got so many news items on the Western Standard site, westernstandard.news, for that reminder for people who are just listening, is subscribers, and that's how we stay independent. We aren't taking any government bailouts. We aren't taking any money out of your pocket through taxes, but we really rely on your subscriptions. So those of you who have subscribed already, thank you very much. And if you haven't, come on, guys. $9.99 a month. Really, it's a small cost to keep so many great reporters and columnists going and keep these things going. Go online, westernstandard.news/subscription, sign up, and it helps keep all of this stuff rolling. So we've got to start with, it was great. As I was saying earlier, I went to bed, the other night, and the Oilers had lost. It was I was mixed on it. I'm not a big hockey fan, but still, that was kind of a letdown for Canadians. But as well, it looked like the Liberals were going to maintain that seat. But in the morning, things had changed. Dave, what went on in Toronto on Monday night?
Things had changed. There was a by-election in Toronto. Just to give you a sense of how historic this win was, the last time the Tories won this seat, the Berlin Wall was still up. That's a few decades ago. So this is how
a mullet win.
Yeah, exactly. So Liberal goes down to defeat in a Toronto riding that they'd held for years. Don Stewart won. As you mentioned, there was 82 separate candidates, 82. Oh, yeah. So the ballot counting was rather slow. But, towards the end, the Liberal candidate Church took the lead. And for many media outlets, that was it. They were rejoicing and, Liberals hold seat. And, but then
And so to bed.
And so to bed they went.
Mm-hmm.
They were in for a shock when the morning sun came up and Don Stewart was the new MP elect in Toronto. So massive win, and I'm sure we'll talk about the consequences. But to say it's historic is accurate.
Yeah, Nigel. By-elections come and go. I mean, people like to read too much into them quite often because it's often where somebody will park a protest vote, or there'll be a limited turnout, or things like that. But this was more than your typical by-election. I mean, again, just because that seat was so traditionally safe. I mean, this is an indication of a much bigger issue when the Liberals can't hang on to that.
Well, this is where you need a tourniquet to stem the bleeding, and I just don't think they have one. Yes, it was a by-election, and people are usually fairly quick to dismiss by-elections as being protest votes. But on the other hand, this was not a small by-election, like a 43% turnout.
It was a good turnout for a by-election.
It was excellent for a by-election. It's more than we would typically have for municipal elections here in Calgary, just to make a point. And so when 43% of the electorate come out and tell the government, you're done, that's historic, and it's a matter of grave concern to the Prime Minister, although he doesn't seem to be showing it.
No, and the Liberals threw everything they could at this riding. The candidate Church was a former staffer with Chrystia Freeland. She was in the riding several times, I assume riding her bicycle over, not taking her chauffeured car. But they threw everything at it, and they still lost. It was quite amazing. But, as you said, the next day the Liberals got up, they saw no evil, they heard no evil, and it looks like they plan to carry on as is. They didn't see the writing on the wall, Nigel.
Well, they certainly have not admitted seeing the writing on the wall. I cannot believe that Mr. Trudeau in his private moments is sort of shaking his head and thinking, well, what just happened here? He said obviously this was not the result we wanted. But, they gave away where I think is their weak point in their thinking, because his reaction was, well, we will never stop working and fighting to make sure you have what you need. We, the government, will make sure you, the peasant, have what you need. And when he talks about working, he's actually talking about new programs to spend money, which you, the peasant, will pay for. You see that echoed in the remarks of Chrystia Freeland, who just hours before the vote tried to draw the line between conservatives and liberals. And she called conservatives cold and cruel and small, and then went off on a tangent about collective values. Liberals have values, we have principles, okay? Values is a nice feminine word. People like the idea of values. But this country was started by people who went out as individuals and did things. The man who went out on the prairies and broke ground and cut down trees and picked rocks and then produced a crop of wheat. He was not part of a collective. He was not working with the government. He was trying to get away from the government in all likelihood. She has that idea that it all comes together at the center and is doled out to you. And that is what has been rejected in this by-election, because the results, the homeless crisis, the affordability of housing crisis, the inflation, all of these are a consequence of government from the center. And she doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. The voters did get it, and they said no.
In what world do you wake up and not think, okay, maybe it's time for me to step down? Is he so delusional that he thinks, he can change it around in 18 months? I just don't understand it.
And he's not terribly politically bright, though. He isn't. I mean, if he were to step forward, think, I can still turn this around. I can fix this mess. He'd have to show an indication of introspection, contrition, just to say, some humbling, to say, wow, okay, the voters sent us a message. We need to reevaluate what we're doing. I mean, it's not a case of giving up defeat to say that. It's just to say, wow, we better start listening. We can change some tact because this is, but instead
and there's some easy things they can do, Cory. They can cancel that capital gains increase. They can cut back on one of the carbon taxes. These are things that are taking money out of the pockets of every Canadian. They're easy solutions, but they cannot admit that they do anything wrong.
This is almost like a foreign administration. It's like we've been conquered and we've got, the party in control. I have to say that I can't get inside Mr. Trudeau's head. So anything that I say about why he does what he does is necessarily speculative. Nevertheless, it does appear to me that he has almost a messianic sense of mission. He believes he is just too important to a greater cause to be thrown off by a by-election where obviously people just didn't understand, and he needs to be clearer. Results, looking back over the almost 9 years that he's been in office, what do the results show? They suggest to me that it was always his mission to take this prosperous, well-ordered Anglo country and following an agenda that he's never really talked about, a hidden agenda, one might call it, make it ashamed of its past, strip it of any sense of national identity, and define moral excellence as group values and living carbon-free, carbon neutral. So it'd be a new kind of country, post-national. Remember that famous interview? Post-national, and he likes the Chinese way of doing things, and he's certainly doing what he can to bring it about.
Well, he admires their basic dictatorship, to use his own words.
Yeah.
But the Liberal caucus, there's some smart people in there. There's some principled people in there. There's some good members of Parliament in there. We like to slap at them quite often, but there are some good people in there. How much longer, though, are they going to toe the party line and go down with this ship?
Look, the closer we get to the election, the closer they are to unemployment. Because what the by-election on Monday showed in Toronto is that there's not a safe Liberal seat in the country. Any Liberal seat could go down to defeat. And, when you're sitting there looking at unemployment, maybe you do start to think about the future. There have been reports of, Liberal MPs phoning media to say that they were shocked Trudeau's still there and he must go. Maybe the fact, Nigel, that there's not an obvious successor is in his mind and keeping him there.
I think there's a few people who think they are the obvious successors, but any speech by Mr. Trudeau on this subject within caucus will probably open with, look, if you are a sitting Liberal MP, you owe your seat to me. Now it's time for you to stand behind me. Whether he can develop that theme and make it sound convincing, but don't forget that in 2015, the Liberals had been knocked down to 34 seats. That was the 2011 election. 34 Liberals. And it was the power of that name recognition, the Trudeau, the nice hair, the sort of the brightness, the sunny ways, the odd socks. All of that struck a nerve, a chord with the voting public. I don't know why. To me, those seem like trivial things. But anyway, it worked. And as a consequence, you had more than 160 Liberal MPs in the House. So the difference between 34 and 160 is the number of Liberal MPs who owe their parliamentary pension to Justin Trudeau.
Well, let me ask you
remind them of that.
Let me ask you this. You know more about things than I do. How much of a runway does he have where it becomes point of no return? He has to stay and lead into the next election. How much time do they need to have a convention, a leadership campaign, and get the new leader in?
They need a year. If he's still there at Labor Day, I think he's going to be there in the election.
So, another interesting aspect of this, too, though, was the vote left the Liberals, but it didn't go to the NDP. They didn't look for a progressive option. In fact, the NDP lost some support in this, and that's got to make, Mr. Singh a little bit uncomfortable. If you're not the progressive alternative to the Liberals, what indeed are you?
Yeah, I think you look at what's happened in Toronto the last few months, the crime out of control in the subway and murders and shootings, the weekly mass anti-Semitic demonstrations by the anti-Israeli groups, the 10 cities. Just 10 cities everywhere in Toronto. The poverty, the increase in the lineups at the Toronto Food Bank, incredible stuff. Life in Toronto has decayed in the last year, and there's no doubt about it. And I think the voters sent a message saying we're fed up of it.
Well, and that's another aspect of this particular constituency. I'm sure impacted this to a degree. It's one of the highest Jewish populations in all of Toronto. There, they make up a good segment of the population.
15%, I believe.
Yeah, which is significant, especially if they're going to get up and vote. And Jagmeet Singh certainly hasn't been sending any love towards Canada's Jewish population, and the Trudeau Liberals. with their chronic appointments of anti-Semites to prominent government positions and their refusal to take any strong stances in this whole Hamas-Israel conflict, it certainly must have harmed both the NDP and the Liberals in there as well.
Yeah, I think so. 15% is quite a significant voting bloc. I don't think there was a 15% spread between the Liberals and the Conservatives. So if that 15% had gone over to the Liberals, it would still be a Liberal seat. So it was a real failure of policy there and supporting the wrong people. By the way, I'm not in favor of support. Not that it matters what I think, but I don't think you should just support a particular ethnic group because they're the ones you need to support to get their votes, and that'll get you the seat. The Liberals have done tons of that, and it's got us where we are. But I do think that in the case of the Jewish population there, which has been harassed and bullied and made to put up with these shocking scenes, which are cast in support of an appalling act of murder, rape, violence, October the 7th, gosh darn it. How can you not stand with that beleaguered population? But the Liberals didn't.
And they recognized that towards the end. I mean, it was no coincidence, a last-minute move, because they've been getting pressure to have that Iranian regiment declared as a terrorist organization for years, and they've dug their heels in. They refused to do so. On the eve of the by-election, they thought, well, I'm sure their internals were showing we are in some serious trouble here. Well, we've got to throw a bone to the Jewish population and show that we will stand up for them. And suddenly they finally declared them as terrorists. Too little, too late.
Oh, it was, and it was shown for what it is, a crass political, movement or option, and the voters knew that. Sometimes you can fool the voters, but a lot of the time you can't.
Well, and there was a 26-point collapse for the Liberals in that constituency compared to last time. So, I mean, again, there's lots of factors, but it's not looking good for them across the country for sure. And getting a little more into Alberta, speaking of an incredible blowout, you got to give the guy credit. Holy cow. I mean, we all kind of expected Nenshi to win the NDP leadership. It was going to be a coronation, but I don't think anybody predicted 85% support in such a wide field of candidates. The nearest, you got more than 10 times the support of the second closest candidate. Boy, he's certainly got a mandate, doesn't he, Dave?
Oh, he does. I remember on our live show that day, we had a bit of a prediction battle, and I said 73%, and you and Derek thought I was off my rocker.
Mm-hmm.
And it was way higher. I think it was 86, 85%. Yeah, he's got the mandate he was looking for. It shows his massive organizational capabilities. It shows what a ground force he can be in politics, and he got the job done. It wasn't even close. So now the work begins. He doesn't have a seat, so he named an official opposition leader and a deputy, and now I'm sure there's going to be a bit of a clear out of political staff as Naheed brings in his own people, and so it's going to take him some time to get organized and figure out the ways of the world in the NDP world, and then the fun and games are beginning now. He's got to try and unite that large tent.
You say it shows that he's got a mandate. It shows something else too, and that is that the character of the NDP has changed, evolved, if you want to put it that way. That used to be a party of principle, not principles that we shared around this table, perhaps, but you knew that these guys would rather be right and in opposition than wrong and in power. That's just the way they were. They do what they could to convince people that they were right, and sometimes they made a reasonable showing. But for the NDP membership to just throw aside all the old stagers, all the people who had put in their time, all the established socialists, because they thought that this man would actually be able to put them in power, suggests to me that power, for its own sake, is what they've decided they really want. There's a different crowd of people that are in the NDP to what they were 30 years ago.
Well, and now with Nenshi, he's making it clear he wants to change that party substantially. And one of the fundamental things of the NDP, and it's been their Achilles heel in Alberta with Notley, is that they are constitutionally tied to the federal entity. I've always rubbed their noses in it and said, Rachel Notley's a branch manager for Jagmeet Singh, because technically, if there was a real conflict, there never was, they rarely exercise it, Singh could override an NDP premier as per the NDP constitution. I think that would only be in a period of crisis where they would do that, because it could shatter their party. But Nenshi's going to shatter it. Now, anyways, he's making it clear he's going to bring that to the members. He's saying, I'll leave it to the members. But when you've just won a leadership with 85%, he can get anything done. They're going to decouple from the federal NDP. Yeah. And that's a very substantial change to them.
And former leader Rachel Notley, even over the weekend, was speaking out against that. She wants to keep it, and Jagmeet actually came to town for the convention, and Rachel Notley thinks it's a very bad idea. The new leader thinks it's a very good idea. So, if he says he's gonna leave it to the party to decide, well, he's got 86,000 new members Sorry, yeah, I think it was 86,000, wasn't it? New membership,
60-some thousand,
and 60-some voted.
86% or something.
Yeah. So he's got tens of thousands. Yeah.
Now, yes.
He's got tens of thousands of new members who will vote on whatever he says.
So he must be assuming anyway. There is a real issue with the two of them tied together. Like, it's not just propaganda from the UCP. There is a case in which Kaylin Ford was libeled by somebody. So she claims by somebody related to the NDP. So in the scattergun of suits in all directions, both the provincial NDP and the federal NDP were named. And the federal NDP got back, well, it had nothing to do with us. You're a separate organization. They couldn't convince the judge of that.
No.
And so for now, I think that's getting litigated as we speak. Mm-hmm. But for now, the judicial system says, well, I can't, if there's a distinction between these two bodies, I can't see where it is. So if you're suing the one, you're suing the other.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And don't forget who else the NDP is beholden to is the unions. Alberta Federation of Labour has a seat on their board. Mm-hmm. Former leadership candidate Gil McGowan ran, couldn't raise a 60 grand and dropped out. But the unions, I don't know whether they still are, Nigel, but they used to be a powerful movement within the NDP. And when he was mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi really didn't get along with unions. So,
well, our columnist John Hilton O'Brien, who's a full disclosure, lobbies on behalf of private schools and homeschoolers and anybody, frankly, outside the education system, had a column in yesterday in which he argued quite strongly that the unions were going to be the biggest problem that Mr. Nenshi faced. They were reluctant to relinquish the influence that they had. Different set of interests to the party. So we'll see, I guess. But he was calling it a civil war within the NDP.
That may not be far from the truth.
We'll know very soon.
I mean, we'll see. I guess the risk that could happen, because this is a threat to Jagmeet Singh as well now as the central organization. If one of your provincial parties has pulled itself out, other provincial parties might consider doing the same. Would he accept that? Or would there potentially be now a party rift? Well, even if it's a little rump, an NDP reforming on the side that's tied to the central party. Like, this is going to be more problematic, I think, than some people understand and imagine. It's even if it's a minority of the members. There's a number of them, as you said, they joined the Democratic Socialists. They don't want to be with Nenshi's purple. In reality, Nenshi's more like the Alberta Liberals used to be than NDP. It's just he knows the only way to the top will be through that party mechanism.
So are you suggesting there might be an old new Democrat party?
I don't know.
I do old Democratic party?
Because the left isn't so inclined to splintering like the conservative parties are as well. So I don't know if they would march off and do something like that. But if this was a conservative thing, was such a fundamental, you could bet there'd already be a founding convention for a new party within weeks. But it's going to be interesting to watch. She's going to have to tread carefully. I mean, he's got a great mandate among 60-some thousand members. Fantastic. But again, we got almost 5 million Albertans he has to appeal to. So, and he's never operated in party politics before. So
no, can he play nicely in the room?
I mean, he's a smart man. That's undeniable with Nenshi, to be given. And he can, but can he change himself? That's the hardest thing. And in a party environment, he's going to have to change how he does a lot of things.
Yeah, and he's also been, over the years, a good buddy with Trudeau. Right? I mean, there was always rumors that Trudeau may appoint him to the Senate. And, whenever Trudeau came to town, they always met and had a lovey-dovey session. So I think he's going to have to decide now what he wants his relationship with a prime minister who's absolutely despised in this province, if he wants to go ahead and keep it chummy. Oh. He's got a lot of different avenues to go down these days.
I suspect that if he can just stall that decision for another 15, 16 months, he won't have to make it.
True.
Well, the other challenge, just kind of stay on it a little bit for a second, though, is that he doesn't have a seat. As you said, he appointed somebody to be and that's kind of rare. Usually they'll still hang on, especially with summer. You've got all summer. You don't need somebody officially the head of the opposition in the legislature. You're that person, even if you don't have a seat. I don't think anybody's willing to give him a safe one. I think he presumed somebody was going to step out of the way. I always thought it was going to be Cece. He's got nowhere to go. He needs that seat, but he can't withstand the humiliation if he ran in a seat and didn't win it. That's why he won't go for Lethbridge West. I mean, it's too dangerous down there.
Yeah, I mean, politicians give up their seat normally when they can get something in return,
so
and that happens when you're the governing party, right? So if you're an MLA and you give up your seat for Nenshi expecting a patronage appointment in return, you may be waiting a long time.
So it'll be interesting. But as much as he's talking, any leader of a party wants a seat in the legislature as soon as reasonably possible. I mean, people will give it a buffer, but if he misses the entire fall session, that's going to make him look weaker. I mean, you've got to be in there.
You know what? I look forward to the debates between him and Premier Smith. I mean, they will go at each other.
Yeah.
It'll be hammer and tongue.
Yeah, he will. I don't know whose seat it'll be, but he can't not. So at some point, there's some visitors come to the office and say, really, you're not seriously going to keep this seat from the leader, are you? You know, if the first visit doesn't do it, the second visit probably will.
Pressures and the offers will come up. There's a lot of horse trading going on right now we aren't seeing.
I got a playful thought for you. Can you imagine a conversation between Tommy Douglas and Naheed Nenshi?
It's definitely generations apart. That would
Baptist minister meets,
whatever the heck
Mr. Purple.
Naheed Nenshi. This is
I think you said it best. This isn't your grandfather's NDP.
No.
Yeah, that's for sure.
CCF for that matter. Well, we'll go back to our favorite punching bag, Justin Trudeau. He again, in hitting things in the news for whatever reason, he got back into the Graves, I guess you can say with the air quotes, issue in Kamloops again last week.
Yeah, it was really strange. I mean, there's been nothing but reports of, they're backing away from Graves. It's not really Graves anymore. It's maybe anomalies. But Trudeau again doubled down at a National Indigenous Day thing where he again called them 215 graves in Kamloops. I think you've called it a hoax. You've gone as far as to call it a hoax.
Until somebody digs something up, I'm just going to say it. Prove me wrong.
But I don't understand the mentality of the man where there isn't 1 ounce of scintilla, yet he doubles down again. And you recall the days of the flag flying at half-mast for all those months and the defaced statues and the church arsons and what that initial allegation did to this country. And to repeat it without any facts, just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I cannot believe that he believes that there are 215 graves there. It's possible, but I find that highly implausible given the amount of doubt that has been shed upon it since the story broke 3 years ago. What I can believe is that he is gaslighting us in this as in so many other things, and just carrying on as if it's an established fact, thereby never having to address why were you so sure when now you're not? Well, the longer you keep it up, the less you have to explain. It's a very extreme. We see this from time to time. Remember that when the Americans invaded Iraq, and there was a guy standing in front of the television camera and saying, "Oh no, everything's under control." And the American tanks were going in the background. Well, it's one of those situations where you just keep up the show for as long as you can. And look, I don't think any of us should say with complete certainty that there are no graves there. But what we can say with complete certainty is that until somebody has a look, finds that there is something there to answer for, I don't think we should be saying it. It's a tremendous calumny on the people who came before us. If you ever read the journals that were kept by some of these nuns across country, where they were looking after Indigenous children and some of the conditions that they encountered when they came, to imagine that they then killed these children it sort of goes beyond vicious and spiteful. There's something dreadfully, dreadfully evil about that assertion. So the burden of proof rests upon those who are making the claim. And if Mr. Trudeau wants to continue to make the claim, then I suggest that he ensures that the RCMP looks into the matter and finds out what the evidence is.
That's it. I mean, my path to the point where I outright call it a hoax now. And hey, if it turns out, if ever they dig and they do find remains, I will eat those words and apologize. And again, be fully supportive of further investigation to find out what led to the death of that person and the repatriation of those remains to the family. But over the years, I mean, when this first came out, I was mortified like everybody else. I believed the headlines. Like, oh my Lord, humanity has done some pretty awful things. Look what happened over there. But then as more and more things came out, it was just to the point of it's starting to look questionable. And now we're at the point, it's 3 years, $8 million. They won't dig. This is a cover-up now. I mean, if the RCMP believed there was a crime, they would dig. If I had said, hey, I've got evidence that there were some bodies buried in my yard in Pritis, oh, but I don't want you to touch them. They say, well, it's not up to you anymore. We're going in and digging a hole in that case. So we got to find out what happened.
Well, actually, the RCMP were specifically called off the case not long after the initial announcement was made. But even the band themselves, Chief Roseanne Casimir, has since been referring to the findings of the ground radar as anomalies and not as graves.
Yeah.
And so, well, let's have a look at your anomaly and we'll tell you
But
what.
while they're being backing off, they haven't explained what happened to the $8 million.
No, that's an open question.
It is.
Well, and that's part of the problem. The $8 million wasn't just for excavations. Part of it was supposed to be for research. And despite what some people are claiming, the record keeping was actually pretty meticulous for a lot of those schools. And the other thing the band, I think, and some others are realizing is there was nobody reported missing. Like these are mystery. If they're graves, nobody knows where on earth they came from. There's no families saying they had misplaced people. There are no reports of missing people. Where on earth did these alleged children come from? Because there's no documentation that they were in the school, despite the stories. So again, I think that's why they're softening the language. They realize, oh wow, we've painted ourselves in a corner. But again, it comes back to Prime Minister Trudeau acting as he is. He just can't back off on anything once he's drawn his line in the sand.
Apparently, Queen Elizabeth kidnapped some of them.
Oh, that lunacy, yes. This was some defrocked United Church nutcase who made that allegation. I still get people email me now and then message about that. Oh, she took off with Philip and 15 Native children, and boy, it doesn't help. It doesn't help.
No.
But well, we'll see. I think the Prime Minister's run out of tunes to play. He just can't flex anymore. He just, as I said, gaslights and pushes.
There's such a simple way to end all this, too. A backhoe.
Yeah.
And 10 minutes, and we'll have an answer, one way or the other. It's simple.
And there's too many people don't want to know the answer.
Well, yeah, maybe that's the problem that we're facing right now.
I mean, if it was to be substantially proved right now that the anomalies at Kamloops were weeping tiles from an old project when there were no graves there, the Prime Minister is once again revealed to be deeply, deeply wrong. And it's not enough to say I made a mistake. He invested a tremendous amount of political capital and personal reputation in this being true. And that would be very, very hard for him to walk back from. So
maybe he just wanted another paid holiday to surf.
Yeah. But it's a sad state when he would put his, it's not surprising, but it's his political pride ahead of something that actually is so socially damaging as it sits as this unsolved mystery, I guess you could say, sitting there that could be so easily clarified one way or another.
Yes.
And in the Camsell hospital site in Edmonton, they were confident they'd found 32 graves there, and they actually dug. And I think that's part of what's happened too, because they found nothing.
By the way, the other people who you have to be aware of and feel sorry for or sorry about are those people who think that their relatives were murdered.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's an awful thing to imagine and to have somebody trying to make political capital out of your family distress, only to find later that actually everybody is accounted for. Those have been used maliciously. And they are owed a huge apology too.
And, there was a time, there was talk of putting people like Cory in jail. Residential school denialism, right? You can't deny that there's 215 bodies there. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but you can't. And talk of that seems to have died down a little bit.
Well, yeah, because if they want to come out and charge me for calling it a hoax, fine. But then the process of discovery would say, well, dig a hole. If you're going to have me charged for denying something, then you better have some evidence to.
Cory, you might be a little careful on that last point. There is such a thing as judicial notice. Like if you're defending yourself, you don't have to demonstrate that 2 + 2 = 4. The court knows that 2 and 2 is 4. And when they declare that they know something, and the Holocaust narrative, for example, is one, you can't argue the facts of the Holocaust. That can't be part of your defense. I have a feeling that the courts now take judicial notice of this narrative. So, when you say, the first defense would be go dig a grave, I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Well, the thing is, at the Holocaust, they had that thing that this is lacking, which is evidence. They had eyewitnesses, they had photo evidence, they had literal graves that were excavated, and of course crematoriums and just many, many other aspects. Mm-hmm. But yes, I know don't put your faith in getting a good trial on something like that. I don't need to expose myself to that. Jane would be pretty pissed if we had to lose the house over a court case. But
takes a lot of quilts to make up for that.
That's right. We'll see what unfolds. Well, again, let's pivot over to tone-deaf politicians and Mayor Jyoti Gondek in Calgary. Quite often disasters can do well for a political leader's future, actually, in ways, if they manage the disaster well. But Madam Gondek doesn't seem to be getting any traction.
You remember Nenshi during the Great Floods. Everybody thought he did a wonderful job. He was a superhero and, was everywhere, every site, every press conference and whatnot. The water main break has not been Jyoti Gondek's finest hour. It started as a disaster, and then when she sort of thought it might be a disaster, then she threw her communications team under the bus. In fairness, I think she has been doing a little bit better in recent days. But, a new poll out shows it didn't give her a bump whatsoever. And I think she went from 30% support to 26% support, cementing her place as the most unpopular mayor in Calgary history. But, you look at other leaders and, crises have made them, it goes as far as Churchill and even Nenshi in the floods. And
you're saying she should have gone and bought an anorak?
Well, it wasn't raining.
Stood out there by the hole and talked to the workers as the.
It wasn't raining. She's not a communicator like Nenshi is. Right? Nenshi can talk to the room. He seems relaxed. He's never met a camera he didn't like and could talk to her. Seems to be a bit of a struggle for Mayor Gondek.
No, it's there's ways of nuancing these things in your favor, and right. And she was very good at it. I mean, I think if I had been, I'd be the last person they would ever ask, but I would have suggested, well, why don't you go down to the site with the camera crew, get a couple of guys up out of the hole and say, how's it going? Oh, don't worry, man, we're going to have this thing fixed in no time. And, now back to the studio. It's just personalize it more.
Well, I think sorry, you remember the great photo of after 9/11, George Bush on top of the heap of rubble. And
well, I was actually thinking of that very thing, and I thought, well, I won't use that as an illustration because 9/11 was kind of a
it's another step. There's no doubt.
Don't mention it all together,
but it shows you your leadership on the ground and being amongst the people.
Windbreaker jacket and the megaphone, standing on the rubble. And
well, that's it. They didn't expect him to start digging or anything, but at least be present. And I mean, part of it too, I think most people aren't blaming Gondek for the rupture itself. They realize she's only been in for 3 years. This was beyond her control, but it's the confidence in her ability to manage a disaster when things become adverse, and she hasn't made people feel more confident in her ability to keep things running smoothly, and it's had the opposite effect. I think she just can't endear herself to people. I mean, it is a popularity contest in the end, and she's doesn't make you feel warm inside.
Could you see anybody on council doing a better job?
Yeah,
I mean, it's a weak bunch. Let's be honest. There's certainly not a lot of people that could handle a crisis like that.
No, I mean, it's not an easy skill. I mean, you want to look like you're managing and communicating, and going down to the hole and speaking to the workers can backfire too. If it looks really contrived and shallow, people will just see that even worse than doing nothing.
Yeah, and all these emergency officials, they've got all those cool jackets, right? And I'm sure when you were in the Prime Minister's office, whenever he's got a cool jacket, and you put the mayor in the cool jacket, and as you say, take him down there and meet with the workers and get your flash bulbs going off, and you look like you know what you're doing. You look like you know you're in charge. Right?
It's but far be it from us to give any helpful advice to Mayor Gondek.
No, she's doing very well on her own, without advice.
Keep shooting those toes off, Madam Mayor, and we'll see what we get in
next October.
A year and a half.
Ahead of time.
All right, well, and then back to, I guess, perhaps running afoul of the government's speech laws, not only, at risk of questioning the narrative on the burials and residential schools, but now you can't defend the oil field, or you might step into a minefield. What happened, Dave?
Oh, this is Bill C-59. You're not allowed to, oil companies aren't allowed to defend themselves and say this is what we're doing for the environment. And we could end up being thrown in jail.
So the word they use is greenwash.
Greenwash, right. And Premier Smith has said, well, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. If they want to throw me in jail, they can. But, Nigel, there's already been consequences, hasn't there?
Yeah, that Pathways Alliance has removed a bunch of material from their websites, in which they were explaining what they were doing and how it would be beneficial for the environment and how they were trying to meet government regulations and government aspirations. But this government, and it's the federal government that we're talking about, does not want oil companies, energy companies, to look good. And so they're not allowed to say what they are doing that is actually aimed at a solution, just in case people think better of them, because they have been targeted as the bad guys in this narrative, and they'd better not step out of line. And we're just going to have to see how rigorous the government is going to be in this. I mean, the Pathways Alliance has already taken material down. What happens to us when we say, well, guess what? This company is starting a carbon capture project over here and hopes, are we then part of the, are we affected by this? We don't know yet. We're going to have to take legal advice.
Seems to me it's just another stupid environmental law coming out of Stephen Guilbeault's department. And I don't know if the federal lawyers are asleep, but I can't see any court upholding this, right? And just like the plastic ban and just like all the other environmental stuff that gets thrown out, if this goes to court, it will be thrown out, I'm sure. I don't have a law degree, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. But I can't see it staying. And then the government will say, well, we'll go back and rework it. Hopefully by that time we've got a new prime minister and this just goes away.
You say it's an environmental law. Actually, I was more thinking of it as part of that suite of information control that this government likes so much. The online harms bill, which, as we keep saying, allows people to launch complaints based on what a person might say, considering what he said in the past. I mean, that's absolutely remarkable development. It's the Minority Report world where you predict what people are going to do and catch them before they do it.
Cory would be serving a life sentence
pretty quickly. Yeah. Well, and it's not talking about countering misinformation, though they like to frame it that way. I mean, if an oil company was saying, hey, fertilize your lawns with crude oil, it'll be good for them. Okay, we could probably get some damages on these guys with it. What they're saying is you're not allowed to defend yourself. You're not allowed to say, hey, we've made a new technological advancement on our well sites that reduced emissions by 25%. It's not misinformation. It's just saying we are having less impact on the atmosphere with our production, and that is the sort of thing that they're saying they're not allowed to say anymore.
Yeah, it's another form of Trudeau censorship. That's all it is censorship.
Which sort of kind of brings us back to really where we started when we were talking about the by-election that he's just lost. People will forget details. If you were to go with a microphone on the streets of Toronto, St. Paul's, and say, tell me 3 things that you don't like about the Liberals, it probably wouldn't be very detailed, but you would very quickly learn that people don't like them. There is a build-up. They get known for policies that drive inflation. They get known, but you can't actually name 3 policies that drove inflation, but you know they got something to do with it. And that leads to the homeless. There's all the immigration. That's part of the homeless thing as well. And you come to this information control. People know they don't necessarily know what Bill C-11, Bill C-18, 93, the Online Harms Act. They don't necessarily know what all these bills do, but they know that they're actually restricting something. They're restricting the internet. They're restricting free speech. And taken with everything else, they've had enough. And so they vote against the Liberals in a safe seat.
You can feel the cumulative trend. Well, we've run out of time, but yes, and that kind of leaves on the right note. The voters are smarter than people give them credit for at times, though. And even if they aren't political dorks like us who are going to dissect the policies, they still see them and they feel the impacts. And it does eventually affect how they're going to do things. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Dave, Nigel, well, thank you very much.
You guys have a great long weekend.
Yeah, and remember, it's Canada Day coming up. Get out there and enjoy time with the family. Celebrate the history of Canada and just
raise the flag.
Raise the flag. Be a little proud. Lighten up and have a good time. We can always grouse and rant and rave the week after. So thank you, everybody. Thank you guys, and thank you, everybody else, for joining us. And we'll see you again next week.
You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited